Hello and welcome back in, everybody. Levi here, and today I've got a bit of a special video here for you guys. I'm going over some of my favorite cards that came out this year, 2023. Now, let it be known, this is not a best of the year, strongest cards, the most ubiquitous cards. My list is a little bit more niche. It's a little bit more finding cards that fit into certain small categories that just really help propel a strategy to a place where it can compete with other things. So I got 15 cards overall that I'm just super grateful that were printed. I really like that the overall power level of these are kind of toned down as opposed to a couple years ago. They're not just generically good that go in a bunch of decks. They are more specific that go into a smaller range of decks, but they're really potent in those strategies. So the first one I'm going to be talking about here, number 15, Wand of the World Soul, 2 and a white for an artifact. Wand of the World Soul enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add a white, or you can tap it to have the next spell you cast this turn have Convoke. So first things first here, I really like that they're adding more of these colored 3-mana rocks, such as, you know, you have the red one, Cursed Mirror, you have the blue one, Midnight Clock. Now we have one in white that kind of gives an edge back to the 3-mana rock players as opposed to the people who are still playing Prismatic Lens just because it's 2 mana for a colorless. You know, I'd rather have those advantages in the 3-mana rocks that give you an extra ability like this that really helps out, you know, creature strategies especially. This is extremely strong in creature strategies because Convoke will let your creatures tap for the colorless or a colored mana that is the creature to help the next spell you cast. I like this card especially because it's in white, because it does help out your mana production, like kind of pseudo mana production in this one. If you're playing a lot of creatures, you know, those token decks or whatever it is, it kind of pseudo turns your creatures into mana dorks, which is something that white doesn't do very well. So I just really think this card is fantastic overall. It should see more play in decks, I think. I currently don't have this one in any decks, but I am vigilantly looking out for a spot where this would fit really well. Next up, number 14, I got Pain Distributor, 2 and a red for a 2/3 Devil Citizen. Devil's one of my favorite creature types, by the way, so I'm stoked that he is a devil, with Menace. And it says whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, they create a treasure token. So it's a little bit of treasure help for your opponents, but also for yourself. However, the good part is whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Pain Distributor deals 1 damage to that player. The reason this card is on the list is for the treasure token hate, the food hate, the clue hate, any sort of artifact token strategy that's being printed lately, like a lot, especially treasures is the big one, but they printed a lot of food support this year. They printed a lot of clue support this year. There's new artifact tokens that are coming out in the Fallout set next year, and I can just foresee that they're not going to be slowing down on this strategy anytime soon. So I really like that we're seeing some counterplay in a card like Pain Distributor to be able to help deal with those kind of strategies and not let them just run away with the game. You know, if somebody's casting their Dockside Extortionist and getting 8 treasures, they're going to be taking 8 damage if they want to use all those treasures right away, and that's a hefty amount that you can't pay that often. And if you're in that treasure deck, it's just going to be really hurting them. So I really like this card, and it is very needed in the format. Next up, number 13, I have Forge Anew, 2 and a white for an enchantment. When Forge Anew enters the battlefield, return target equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that one in and of itself is pretty strong. It's somebody obviously was going to go to kill your Swiftfoot Boots or your Blackblade Reforged or one of your Sword of X and Ys. If you happen to draw this a little bit later, once that's already gone, you can get it back with this. But I think the middle ability is the really important one. As long as it's your turn, you may activate equip abilities anytime you can cast an instant. So I'll just go ahead and read the last one and then go over that middle ability. You may pay 0 rather than pay the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate during each of your turns. So there's a few scenarios here. So the first one is you have 2 creatures, your opponent has 1. You load up all your equipment onto 1 creature, you swing out, they obviously block the one that's loaded up, and then at instant speed, you can move them all over to the one that's not blocked and get in for damage, which is something you've never been able to do before. I'm pretty sure this is the only card in the game that gives your equip abilities instant speed. As far as I'm aware, this is the only one, so that it really opens up more possibilities for an equipment deck. Plus that third ability really helps the second ability. You know, if you're going to combat, it's kind of likely that you probably already played a couple things this turn, so if you don't have all the mana that you need to equip the equipment over to the second creature, you know, the one that's not being blocked, this helps pay for at least one of them. You know, if you have your Colossus Hammer or whatever, you drop it for 1 and it's the 0 to equip instead of 10, which is extremely strong. Also, if it is your turn, you know, this is a little bit more niche, but if it is your turn and somebody goes to destroy one of your creatures or remove one of your creatures, you can at instant speed react with equipping your Swiftfoot Boots over to them. So as long as it's your turn, you can kind of think that your board is pretty much protected as long as you have some sort of protection on an equipment, which you most likely will if you're playing the right deck. Plus, I just really like equipment in Commander in general. I don't even think you have to have this in a equipment only deck. If you have, you know, I think 6, 7, 8 equipment in your deck, which I do have in a few of my decks, just a smaller amount of equipment, I think I might even put this in there just because it's that good. Next up here, number 12, Champions of Minas Tirith, 5 and a white for a 4/6 human soldier. When Champions of Minas Tirith enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, which is just fantastic. I love every card that gives the Monarch. It's a fantastic mechanic. Should be printed on way more cards. However, at the beginning of combat on each opponent's turn, if you're the Monarch, that opponent may pay X, where X is the number of cards in their hand. If they don't, they can't attack you this combat. This is a perfect Monarch card because you want to have the Monarch. You also want to have that Pillow Fort strategy built up because if your opponents hit you, obviously they take the Monarch back. So I currently have this in my Jared Carthalion Pillow Fort deck / Monarch deck that I am in love with. It's my favorite deck I own, and I'm super glad that we're getting more Monarch cards printed into the format. You know, 6 mana is a lot, but a lot of those Monarch cards that give you the Monarch and they give you some sort of advantage happen to be, you know, 4, 5, 6 mana. So I think it definitely is playable, especially in those type of decks. But I think you could just put this in any deck that you don't want to be taking damage, because say, you know, somebody goes to combat and they have 5 cards in their hand. Are they really going to pay that 5 mana to attack you? They're probably not. They're probably just going to hit somebody else. So I really like Champions of Minas Tirith just in general, and the fact that we're getting more Monarch cards. Next up here, I got Ghoulish Impetus at number 11, 2 and a black for an aura enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1, has death touch, and is goaded. When enchanted creature dies, return Ghoulish Impetus to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. There's so many good things about this card. 3 mana, it's great, super low to the ground. It goads your opponent's creature and gives it death touch. So there's so many scenarios where this is good. You know, you put it on a creature that you don't want to hit you. It's a big scary creature. So it's goaded, has death touch. It has to swing at another opponent, so they can do a couple of things. They let the creature in and it deals a bunch of damage to them. It does, like, you know, whatever, infect or gets combat damage triggers or whatever it is, and that's good. Scenario 2, the opponent blocks it. One of your opponents blocks the creature, however, it has death touch and it kills that creature. That's also good for us because we want our opponent's creatures to be dying. Number 3, which is probably the best one, they block it and both the creatures die. That's 2 creatures gone, and this comes back on the next end step. Another reason I really like this card is it has the possibility of pseudo dodging board wipes because it comes back on the end step. So if somebody casts a board wipe and then they cast another creature, this will come back. I think it's likely to happen because a lot of people are going to cast a board wipe and not want their defenses to be completely down. So they will cast a board wipe and then cast a small creature just to have a blocker in case somebody has a haste creature or something like that. So if that is the case, Ghoulish Impetus will survive a board wipe, which is pretty nice. Coming in at number 10, Tyrion's Soul Cleaver, 1 mana legendary artifact equipment. You know, I love my equipments. Equipped creature has vigilance, and whenever another artifact or creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on an equipped creature and equip 2. This card is just insanely cool. I'm not gonna say it's as good as, you know, like Shadow Spear or something, but there's so many good things about it. First of all, it's 1 mana, super cheap, comes out turn 1. Equip 2, also fantastic. A lot of the equipment they've been printing lately in the last couple years, it's too much to equip or it's too much to cast or anything for the effects that you're getting. You know, they're not aggressively costed enough like this one is. I like that it's low to the ground and it gives an extremely good buff. Equipped creature has vigilance, I think is extremely underrated in the format. You know, if you have a big attacker, say your Voltron commander or whatever it is, you want to be able to block with that as well. You don't want to just swing out with it and then leave your defenses down. You know, you just want to be able to have a blocker when you need it. And giving your creature vigilance is just a fantastic ability. Also, this is pretty similar to the Pain Distributor because this is, again, treasure hate and food hate and clue hate and aristocrat hate, anything, sacrifice hate, anything like that. Because whenever another artifact or creature, it doesn't even say non-token, is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you put a 1/1 counter on the equipped creature, which just makes it bigger, and that just propels your strategy even further. This card's only $1 right now. I don't have it currently in any decks, but I'm going to be picking up a few copies the next time I buy from TCG Player, and I'm throwing this in a couple decks because I just think it's so good. I don't think there's any game that you're going to go through where there's no artifact tokens, there's no Wayfarer's Baubles, there's no aristocrats, there's no sacrifice, there's no forced sacrifice, there's no creatures that are dying in combat. This will trigger every single game, and I guarantee you if you throw it in your deck, you're going to be happy with it. Next up at number 9, All Will Be One. 3 red for an enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or planeswalker an opponent controls. So it doesn't hit the battles, but battles aren't that ubiquitous anyway. There's not that many, but maybe later down the line there will be more battles and this will be not as good. But for now, I think this card's just fantastic in tons of different decks, especially in decks where your commander is putting counters on things. It doesn't even have to be +1/+1 counters. You know, we have so many new counters in the format lately. You know, the shield counters from New Capenna. You have tons of different counters that are just not +1/+1 counters that are easily put on your creatures, and All Will Be One triggers off of that. I currently have this one in my Kibo deck because whenever an opponent sacrifices an artifact, I put a counter on each of my apes or monkeys, and that will deal that much damage to any target that I want, pretty much. And it's just fantastic synergy in a deck like that. And really, any deck that's putting counters, you can probably probably put this card in there and you will be happy you did. Another one here, number 8, return the past 4 red for an enchantment. As long as it's your turn, each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. Its flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So this is quite similar to a few other cards we already have in red. You know, Past in Flames, you have the Efreet Flame Painter, but that one has to deal combat damage. You have the Dragon, but that's only once per turn. I can't remember, the Hellkite something. I like that this is an enchantment and it sticks around and gives it to you for free. So you pay the 6 mana up front, and every subsequent turn you don't have to pay extra mana to get this effect. It's just you're paying the flashback cost for the spells. So something like a Past in Flames or something, you know, you can use it twice, but you have to pay the 4 mana or whatever it is, 4 or 5 mana to get that effect, and that kind of slows down your storm turns or whatever you're trying to pop off. I don't currently have this in my Urabrask deck, the flip one, but I'm going to be buying it soon and throwing it in there because it would just love this type of effect, especially on an enchantment. I think it's just super cool. Next up here, Demon of Fate's Design, 4 black for a 6/6 enchantment creature demon with flying and trample. It says once during each of your turns you may cast an enchantment spell by paying life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. Also, pay 2 and a black, sacrifice another enchantment, and Demon of Fate's Design gets +X/+O until end turn, where X is the sacrificed enchantment's mana value. You know, that could be a potent sacrifice ability there at the end, considering it is a 6/6 flying trampler. So if you happen to be getting in for damage in the air and you're guaranteed to get it, you can sacrifice another huge enchantment, and then hopefully this gets in for lethal or something. So I think the first ability is the most important one. I'm a big fan of enchantment decks, and being able to pay life instead of mana for, you know, one of your huge enchantments like your Nylea's Colossus or something like that, you just pay, you know, your 7 or 8 life, however much that card is, instead of paying 7 or 8 mana. So that can cheat out really big things and help your lead a lot. I think I'm glad that black got this and not like green or white, because I think I like that Enchantress is moving into not necessarily new colors, but I'm glad that it's in black, because I think green, white Enchantress is already so fleshed out that we don't really need more support there. I'd like to have more support in other colors such as black, and I'm glad this card exists. Coming in at number 6, Sting, the Glinting Dagger, 2 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. Like I said, love my equipments. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has haste. At the beginning of each combat, untap equipped creature. Equipped creature has first strike as long as it's blocking or blocked by a goblin or orc. So I guess that can come up from time to time. It's if they have a changeling or something like that playing against Morophon, I guess. I don't think that's really the important part. The important part is at the beginning of each combat, untap equipped creature. So if your commander has a tap ability that you can tap or activate at instant speed, I don't see why you wouldn't play this. There's so many commanders that have these really value-y tap abilities you're going to want to use on everybody's turn. So having it on such a cheap card, a 2 mana equipment that only equips for 2, you know, somebody goes to kill your commander, it's like whatever, it only costs 2 to re-equip, so it's not that hefty of a price. Plus it also gives your creature haste, which means you're able to activate the ability the moment it comes out, plus the other 3 turns before it gets back to your turn, because it gives it haste. It's not just for that turn, it's until your next turn. So I currently have this in my Kibo deck because it has a tap ability, but this really can go in any deck where your commander has a tap ability that's at instant speed, and I think you're going to like it a lot. Coming up at number 5, City on Fire, 5 red, 8 mana for an enchantment. That's an expensive spell. However, it has Convoke, just like Wand of the World Soul. I really like Convoke, and it is Fiery Emancipation. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage instead. So many decks this goes in. You're playing a token deck, goblins or something. You can cheat this out. If you have 8 goblins, which is not hard at all to get to, especially, you know, a Krenko deck or whatever it is, Muxus deck, whatever, you have a bunch of creatures out, you tap them for this, and they're all dealing triple, which is fantastic. This goes in a Pinger deck. You tap your Prodigal Pyromancer to deal 1 damage. Nope, it's actually 3 damage, so that's a lightning bolt on a tap. There's so many decks that this fits in, and I'm so glad that we have another copy of it, especially one that could be cheated out for even cheaper than a Fiery Emancipation. You know, I have Fiery Emancipation in so many decks, I think 2 or 3 right now, and the fact that this card is, again, only $3, similar to Fiery Emancipation, which is now only $3 around, I think this one is going to see playing the format for a very long time. I'm just glad it exists. This one's really awesome. Next up, at number 4, Nesting Dovehawk, 3 and a white for a 2/2 bird with flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, populate, and whenever a creature token enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Nesting Dovehawk. This card does not seem that good until you actually get it into play, because you're going to cast this once you already have a token out. So at the beginning of combat, you're going to populate, then it gets a counter, then it's a 3/3. And then if you're playing a token deck, every time you create one, you put a counter on this, and then you populate and you get another thing, and then you get another counter on this. I currently have this in my Selesnya Shrine deck, and it just gets so out of hand so quick. It's really good because it populates the shrine tokens, which then really helps out the spirit token creators. Plus, it just becomes a huge flying threat in the air. This thing will be a 10/10 before you even know it, and the fact that it's flying, your opponents are going to have to answer this, or else it's just insane value that you're going to be getting every single turn. At the beginning of your combat, you just populate. You don't even have to pay any extra mana. It's just super good. I think this card goes in so many token decks. Next up at number 3, how could I not talk about Roaming Throne? 4 mana for a 4/4 artifact creature golem with Ward 2. I don't know why it has Ward 2, but it does. As Roaming Throne enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Roaming Throne is the chosen type in addition to its other types, and if a triggered ability of another creature you control of the chosen type triggers, it triggers an additional time. So I think a lot of people see this and think it goes in a tribal deck, and I don't think it does at all. I mean, obviously it does, but it does not need to be a tribal deck. I guarantee you, like, probably 3/4 of the decks that you have will benefit from having this in it. Like, this just goes in every single deck where your commander has a triggered ability, which is most decks nowadays. If you're building around your commander, it either has an activated ability or a triggered ability. Most of the time, it's one of those two. Rarely, it's kind of a static ability. Like, if it's a combat damage trigger, that's a trigger, so it triggers twice. If it's an attack trigger, it triggers twice. If it's an enters the battlefield trigger, it triggers twice. There's just so many decks that this fits in. It's ubiquitous. It goes in so many decks. It is a little expensive. It's like $12 right now or whatever, but I guarantee you this fits in at least one of your decks. It probably fits in every deck you have. But again, with these kinds of ubiquitous cards that go in every deck, which deck do you really put it in? You know, which deck are you going to take out that 100th synergistic card just to throw this in? I think if your commander is triggering either multiple times a turn on everybody's turn or frequently and for cheap easily, I think this goes in there. If your commander only triggers once per turn, I don't think it's super great. If it's an ETB commander, you probably don't really want it because it's not really worth it. But just look through your collection and see which deck this fits in, because it will fit in one of them, I guarantee it. Coming in at number 2 here, Lich Knight's Conquest, 4 and a black for a sorcery. Sacrifice any number of artifacts, enchantments, and or tokens, and then you get to return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. I think of all the cards on my list here, this is the one I have in the most decks. I think I have this in about 4 or 5 decks now, because there's so many ways you can use this. If you're in a treasure deck, this gets back your creatures. You sacrifice your treasures and you're good to go. If you're in a food deck, a clue deck, a creature token deck, if you're in a roll deck, which the rolls came out in this set, so those are tokens, so that works. They're enchantments. If you're in any sort of sacrifice enchantment deck, there's a few of those, like my Ariete deck. So many useful ways you can use this. For 5 mana, you know, 5 mana is pretty much the going rate for a standard recursion spell. You know, you have your standard ones, your reanimates and stuff like that, which are 1 mana. They're super cheap, but those are the outliers. Those aren't the standard. The standard is usually around 4 or 5 mana to get a creature out of the graveyard, and this is sacrifice 3 foods and get back 3 creatures for 5 mana. This is sacrifice 10 treasures and get back 10 creatures for 5 mana. It's just nuts. This is so cool. It goes in so many strategies. Anything where you're making tokens, this can pretty much go into in black, and I think a lot of decks are fulfilling that role. Coming in at number 1, though, what's my favorite card of the year? I only have this in 1 deck, and I don't care. I think it's so cool. It's 500-Year Diary, 3 and a blue for a legendary artifact clue. It enters the battlefield tapped. It taps to add a blue for each clue you control, and it's also a clue itself, obviously, so you can pay to sacrifice it to draw a card at the very least. So one of my favorite decks I've ever made, and probably my favorite to play currently, is my Inquisitor Eisenhorn deck. So when this card came out, I threw it in there, and it does so much work. There's so many times where I have 10 or 15 clues just lying around waiting to be used, and now that's 10 or 15 mana I get to use for some of my other spells. For the decks that this fits in, it is a huge effect. It is super strong. It is technically a 4 mana rock because it taps for it 1 on itself because it is a clue. So at the very least, this taps for 1 mana, enters battlefield tap, which is not great. It does have the draw card on it if you want to. So the bare minimum, you can sacrifice it to draw a card, or you can tap for 1, pay another 1 into this, and then sacrifice to draw a card. So you could do that, but if you have a clue deck, which I think obviously we're getting more of in the Murders at Karlov Manor set, this card is just going to be super popular in those decks as well, and I really like it a lot. It is fantastic. Just like a lot of the cards from the Doctor Who set, they fit in these little niche strategies, and I'm super glad that this card exists. So there we have it. There's my 15 favorite cards that I am glad were printed in the format this year. This was kind of a different video for me. You know, I glanced through every card from the year. There was about 2,000 cards or whatever. So I just scrolled through pretty quickly. I didn't read all of them or anything, but I looked for the cards that immediately stood out that I knew I liked, and I kind of just threw together this list. So if you guys happen to enjoy this list and enjoyed the video that I put together here, if you're still here all the way to the end, thank you for watching. I really appreciate the love and support that I'm getting lately. If you'd like to see more of my content, feel free to go ahead and subscribe down below, leave a like, comment. I try to reply to all the comments that I get down on my videos. So if you want to have a conversation about one of these cards, go ahead and talk to me down in the comments. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, take care.